Hello, Janjus and other beautiful beings of the World Wide Web. Is Cantraption back with another informative video. So this video specifically is going to be focusing on how to do a solo run of the twisting corridors in Torghast Tower of the Damned. Now, if you guys are already a little bit in the know about this, if you get all the way up to level 8 and complete it in the twisting corridors, then you will receive the ever so coveted corridor creeper, one of only 2 mounts that you can use in the maw, and I'm sure it's something that a lot of us warlocks would have really liked to have had much earlier. So this is going to try and be a very comprehensive video about how to solo run this as a warlock. There is a lot of stuff to cover, so I do apologize if certain things do end up being slightly out of order, or if I completely butcher the names of some of these anima powers and etc. Just for key points of reference, this is specifically focused on Affliction Warlocks. Some of these tips and tricks will probably help with Warlocks in general, but that's going to be the key focus of this one. I personally ran this as a Night Fae Affliction Warlock, running about 204 item level. Not to say that you couldn't do this with slightly less item level, but I would say bare, like minimum 200 item level just for your own sake if you're trying to solo this at level 8. Stuff before that certainly you can probably do for lower item level, but for the level 8, the last one, I would recommend being on the higher end. Also, just to kind of point out, these were the talents that I was using. There's nothing too crazy special here. The only one that I would point out is the Inevitable Demise, and that is because with the Night Fae Coven, you can do a couple of interesting things there that I'll reference to later. So, just to get a general overview of the twisting corridors, it's basically 3 of the normal wings all stacked up on top of each other. That being said, they will obviously get progressively harder, but as well as that, the order in which you encounter them will be random, and it's not necessarily going to be 3 different ones. Now, if you're unlucky like me, you might end up on your level 8 run just doing Mort Regard 3 times in a row, without the ability to jump because of an anima power and increase movement speed out of combat as an insect swarm, which makes it really hard to keep track of if you're going to launch yourself off into the abyss over one of the many Chasmus chain bridges. But we'll have a little bit of a tip and trick on that later if you do end up being that unlucky. My condolences. So then, twisting corridors in general, and Torghast in general, is kind of a bit of an RNG raffle, I guess, in a sense. There's a lot of RNG involved in getting kind of your best outlook, so let's just cover some of the things that you can do to make sure that you're maximizing your potential for RNG. One of the biggest and most important ways to make this easier for you will be through the upgrades that you can buy from the vendor Venari to upgrade the vendors in twisting corridors and Torghast in general, to upgrade the rarity of the items that the vendor carries, the amount of items they carry, the amount of choices that you have when looting anima hordes, and so on. I'll put some of those up on the screen right now, but I would say one of the most important ones that you will probably want to get, if at all possible, is the possibility matrix. This allows you to basically get an extra choice every time you loot an anima cell, and it will really go a long way into making it so that if you're kind of stuck between like an okay choice and something that's completely useless, at least you're always kind of making headway. That being said, one of the items that isn't normally listed is the Phantasmic Infuser that you can get from her fairly early on. And this basically just allows you to use some of your extra Phantasma to give yourself a 30-minute buff while in Torghast. And this can be anything from haste to mastery to cooldown reduction, etc. And it can be a nice way to use some of the excess Phantasma that you get. So as Warlocks, we are kind of blessed when it comes to PvE in that we have a fair bit of survivability, good damage, and a tanking pet. Now we're going to be focusing mainly on 3 things to make sure that you are as powerful as possible for the final boss of a Twisting Corridors run. The general idea is that you're going to want to buff yourself to be as powerful as possible, dealing as much consistent damage as possible, while also making sure that you're able to farm enough Phantasma in the early stages to be able to buy out everything that you need, and have enough survivability that you'll be able to survive any damage that happens. Now, you can make your Voidwalker into a really big, chunky blueberry boy, but unfortunately there is still some miscellaneous AoE damage that certain mobs put out that will still affect you, and so you have to make sure that your own HP and survivability is still up there as well. So let's start with the farming side of things. As Affliction Warlocks, you have a really easy way to farm Phantasma, especially early on if you luck out with a certain Anima skill. And that Anima skill is the Plunderer's Guise. Now, the Plunderer's Guise basically makes it so that, specifically for Affliction, every time you cast Malefic Eruption, you get 5 Phantasma. And so if you get one of these, you're basically just making Phantasma very, very quickly just through your own rotation. As mobs become chunkier and healthier, you're just going to keep casting this over and over and over again. And it stacks. So if you get 1, 2, or 3 stacks of this, you're going to be making anywhere from 5 to 10 to 15 Phantasma every time you cast Malefic Eruption. And really, you shouldn't need any more than 2 to make it so that you can pretty much buy out anything that you need and really not even have to worry about looting most of the Phantasma around the corridors. The other Anima cell that goes hand in hand with this to really maximize your ability to farm is the Mark of Borrowed Power. This basically gives you the ability so that you have a 15% chance anytime you use soul shards on one of your core abilities, like Malefic Eruption, that you basically regen all of your soul shards. And it stacks as well. I would recommend, if you can, getting at least 2 to 3 stacks of this to basically make it so that anytime you get into a big fight and you're just spamming Malefic Eruption, you will pretty much have infinite soul shards throughout the entire fight. Now, with those 2 things in place, you'll have the ability to pretty much buy out almost anything from the vendor that you want. This means buying all the plundered Anima cells, Ravenous Anima cells, and any other goodies that the vendor in Twisting Torghast might sell, including the Fleeting Frenzy Potion, which I would highly recommend if you find these. It's not a guarantee they'll sell it each time, but definitely save at least 1 or 2 of these for your final boss attempt. Now then, with the idea of building yourself up to be as powerful and strong as you can for the final boss fight, it's imperative that, especially in the lower floors, you full clear everything. And I mean everything. Every trash mob, every side alley, find all the chests, find all the goodies, find every animal cell that you possibly can. Free every spirit, just do everything that you can to buff yourself as much as possible. Now, you can start to skip some things later on in the Twisting Corridors run. I would only really recommend you do that if you have all of your Glutton's Guise and Anima stuff set up, and you've also gotten a Golden Idol Anima cell, which basically lets you see which mobs have the plundered Anima cells for you to kill. Otherwise, if you don't have those, I would still recommend that you pretty much full clear as much as possible to maximize how many cells you're getting and how many choices you are getting. Okay, so let's move on to survivability. Now, this is pretty important, and Affliction Warlocks are pretty good already with their self-heals. And if you have the talent to increase your life drain as well as the soul rot, you're already off to a pretty good start when it comes to self-heals. That being said, you by yourself will not be powerful enough, no matter how tanky you make yourself, to survive most of these mobs and elite mobs, especially the higher you go. So your Voidwalker is going to be really imperative to your survival. Now, there are 2 kind of key ways to make it so that your Voidwalker is as tanky and chunky and powerful as possible, and keeping most of the enemies at bay. The first one that comes to mind is the Pact of Infernal Intimacy. It's pretty powerful just in general. If you do end up getting this one too late and you haven't already kind of made it so your Voidwalker can survive most fights, it might be hard to get its stacks. However, it basically makes it so that every time you go up a floor, your Voidwalker's health and damage increases by 100%. There is a cap, I believe, to how far this can go, but I think it's still about 4 or 5 times. And by the time you hit about 3 stacks of this, your Voidwalker should be able to survive just about anything that the dungeon throws at it, and really should be able to handle just about any mob, to the point where you really should only have to worry about yourself. Now, the downside about this is that if you die, or if your Voidwalker is resummoned, it will lose all of its stacks. So it's important to kind of be cognizant of this and be very aware of keeping him alive, or yourself alive. If you lose your stacks, it's not the end of the world. You just need to have at least 3 or so stacks by the time you encounter the final boss. Now then, the other means of making your Voidwalker healthy are, there are a few anima cells that are specific to the Voidwalker to increase their health and damage. But the other way that you can increase your Voidwalker's health is by increasing your own health, since it does stack off of you. And this feeds into probably the more important thing of making yourself as healthy as possible as well. Now there are 2 ways to go about this. One is with the Secret Spices anima cell, which basically makes it so that whenever you kill a Maw Rat, you gain 2% increased HP, up to a total of 100% or 50 stacks. If you don't get this buff right away, it's not too big of a hassle. I would say so long as you have about 4 combat floors left to go, you should be able to get max stacks or at least very close to it. And again, RNG is going to play a pretty big factor into what you can kind of give yourself immediately. Sometimes you'll get really lucky, sometimes it'll be a little bit of a harder road to hoe, and I would say that if you're really struggling to, get your build to work and get your final pieces in place by like floors 12 to 14, it might just be worthwhile to just start over or take a break and come back to it later and hope that RNG is a bit more generous. Now the other key upgrade that you can get for your health is the, if I'm pronouncing this correctly, Oberon Armor. Now Venari does sell a upgrade that will increase the quality of these armor pieces, but the key one that we're talking about right now is the one that increases your health by 15%. You can find these throughout the dungeon and cells and from the vendors, and they can be anywhere from 15 to 30 to 45% health increase. That being said, there are other variants of this armor that also benefit from the Venari upgrade that will increase your critical strike chance, your mastery, your haste, and so on. These are all pretty useful, and I would recommend that if you're stuck between a choice that is so-so and one of these, always, go with the idea of like, well, if you have more haste, more mastery, etc., this will always help you in the long run. The final one that I would like to point out for survivability, and I feel like this one may be skimmed over by some other people, but I find to be very, very important, is the Blood Gorged Leech. Now, I had a hard time finding this on Wowhead, but the Blood Gorged Leech basically makes it so that your damaging spells and abilities have a very high chance to heal you and your summoned demon for 5% of their maximum health. Now, 5% might not sound like a whole lot, but this ability does stack. So you can get 1, 2, 3, 4 stacks of this, and suddenly your spells and abilities have a high chance of healing you and your demon for 15 to 20% of their hit points. And if you have a decent amount of hit points, you're suddenly able to heal your Voidwalker without having to worry about channeling into them, just by doing your normal rotation. This is very important and will make it so that you don't have to worry about keeping your Voidwalker healthy during extended boss encounters. Okay, so let's talk damage. Now, we've already kind of covered that the Oberon armor pieces are pretty nice to improve your damage, but there are definitely a couple of key ones that you should look out for as you're ascending the tower. One that can definitely be nice is the Disembodied Tongue, which allows you to, when you place your Curse of Tongues on a target, will increase your haste by 5%. If you're Knifey, you may want to look out for the Withered Root Cluster, which reduces the cooldown of Soul Rot. And if you have the Impending Demise talent, like I have, you can combine it with the other rare Night Fae Anima Cell, the Accursed Hand Wraps. Now, this one I wouldn't say is completely vital, but if you are building, and if you do just end up RNGing into getting a few of these, you can actually make this a very powerful ability for you. Casting Soul Rot increases the damage of your Drain Life spell by 200% for 8 seconds. Now, if you have the Inevitable Demise, you will also be able to stack this with the 50 stacks that already increase your damage output. And with larger AoE pulls, you can build those stacks pretty fast. Combining that with the Accursed Hand Wraps, or a couple stacks of the Accursed Hand Wraps, and you can pretty much AoE an entire cluster of mobs very quickly while ensuring that your self-heal is basically god tier. Some other handy Warlock anima cells that you can find throughout Torghast include the Dark Whisper's Signet, which will increase your special summon demons. So if you're Destro, you'll get another Infernal. If you're Affliction, you'll get another Dark Glare, and you can also stack these so you can end up with as many as 4 or 5 Dark Glares that join you whenever you use your spell. Another nice one to have is the Warlock's Bargain. It increases your haste by 20% but reduces your stamina by 10%. I would say that the 10% loss in stamina isn't too bad when compared to having that kind of consistent haste. Now, one of the anima cells that you might be tempted to get early on is called Soul Platter, which basically gives you which basically makes it so that your summoned demon, like your Soul Glare Infernals, will increase their duration by 100%, but it has a 50% chance to consume one of your soul remnants when it's summoned. I would advise you, especially if you've gotten the anima cell Dark Whisper's Signet a couple of times, to not take this until you are later on in the dungeon, as this does apply to every single one that you summon. So if you have a few stacks of Dark Whisper's Signet and you end up with 3 or 4 or 5 Dark Glares, there's a 50% chance from each of those to consume one of your soul remnants. Okay, that more or less covers a lot of the higher tier core Warlock anima cells. So let's go to some of the more generalized ones that you can find that will still help with your DPS. Now, as you go through Torghast, there's going to be a lot of chests and puzzles and anima cells that will give you a wide variety of spells and abilities. And I would highly recommend that you kill any silver elites that you find, as they can have some of the really juicy ones. The name escapes me at the moment, but there is an anima cell that allows you, that gives you an increase of your primary stat and also self-healing every 5 seconds, which is very nice. Some of the other anima cells that some people might overlook are some of the ones that give you the chance to deal a certain kind of damage or to cast a certain kind of spell when you deal certain damage or effects. Ones like the Lens of Elchever? When you critically strike with a direct attack, an Arcane Bolt will also strike your target, dealing 92% spell power arcane damage. Now, there are a few like this that you can find throughout Torghast. Some of them involve chance to, cast a spell or have an extra ability proc when you deal damage. Some of them are based off of the type of damage you do, and they really can become worthwhile if you stack enough of these to really just add more and more damage to your output. And remember that these will stack with things like your haste and crit and mastery, so that as you're building your stats up, these will also increase along the way with you. Keeping in mind that some of these can also be useless or even hinder you. Some of these may only proc if you deal a specific kind of damage, like Holy. And if you're Affliction and Warlock, you're really only doing shadow damage, so just kind of be cognizant of that. As well as there are some that will reduce certain kinds of damage, some that will give you an upgrade but will also reduce your fire damage. And in that case, if you're running Affliction, that really doesn't bother you at all. But if it reduces shadow damage or your own self-healing, that sort of thing, you may want to shy away from it. Some of these anima powers include the Elysium anima powers, which basically are ones like the Alembic. Your mastery is increased by 30%, but your arcane damage and healing done is reduced by 25%. Something like this can definitely increase your damage output without really hindering you, since you don't really deal a lot of arcane damage. There are some that will give you minor inconveniences, such as the Elysium weights, which will increase your primary stat, in this case your intelligence, by 30%, but you no longer have the ability to jump. And there's another one that also makes it so you can't move backwards either. Now, these may be slightly inconvenient, but the damage increase output is definitely worth the slight inconvenience. One of the other things that can definitely help you along the way is the Soul Void bag, which basically makes it that creatures that die while afflicted by corruption have a 5% chance to grant you soul remnants. Now, this ability can stack, so if you get it early on, you can actually probably farm yourself a pretty amount of soul remnants throughout the dungeon. And this may just reinforce your position to full clear weaker mobs. If you're running as an Affliction Warlock, your Seeds of Corruption basically apply corruption to pretty much all the targets that are being AoE'd down by you anyways, so it's a good way to help build up your soul remnant stacks. Now, there really are a lot of anima cells that you can potentially get, and a lot of them can be quite useful, so there's probably just too many for me to really cover all in this one kind of brief explanation video. That being said, it's always important to kind of keep an eye out for the spells and abilities that will increase your damage or your crit, and oftentimes you have the choice between something that's going to do something at least marginally useful as opposed to just kind of, not really helping you or a hindrance, then you want to err on the side of building up your stacks as much as possible. There is one anima cell that I would like to make a point of for people, just in case you guys get tripped up by this. Now, if I'm pronouncing this correctly, the Silas of Denathius is a pretty powerful anima ability. Basically, it makes it so you gain an additional 15% damage and healing when you ascend to a new floor of the Jailer's Tower, but you lose 5% maximum health when you ascend to a new floor of the Jailer's Tower as well. So, my one hint about this is do not take this if you are in the early levels. It may be very tempting, but the 5% health loss, if you can't kind of even it out, will pretty much cripple you and make it so that most of the unavoidable AoE damage that certain mobs throw at you can pretty much one-shot you. So if you have only a couple floors to go and you feel pretty confident about your health, then by all means, take this. It will help. But if you're still, in your lower half of floors and you find this, it may be better just to steer away from it because you might make yourself too much of a glass cannon. That being said, we'll cover a few of the more utility spells and abilities and tricks that I have found to kind of help with things moving forward in the Twisting Corridors. Other anima cells that can help you are things like the Crown of Obstinance, which basically reduces the casting speed of mobs that are within 15 yards of you. The Bottle of Enigma, which makes it so you have an obscuring mist cloud around you, making it so that any casters can't target you unless they're inside of this. This does not avoid all of the kind of universal AoE abilities, but it can help you not get hit by some extra pot shots. Now, there is one more that I'm seemingly not able to find, but I do know that it exists, that effectively makes it so that once per floor, once you drop to about 20% hit points, you will jump back up to 100%, and that may just help you with any close calls and close shaves that you end up having. Now, some other utility anima powers that you might want to consider are things like the Dissolving Vial, which makes it so that any mob that has corruption on it has its speed reduced by 60% and your corruption spell increases its damage by 100%. On the off chance that your Voidwalker should die, this really makes it possible to kite just about anything just by how much it slows. Another one that I would consider you pick up is the Shadowed Short Blade, which increases the Shadow Fury stun duration by 100%. You can find this multiple times, and if you don't have the ability to interrupt a cast because you can't have your Fell Hunter out, this can effectively make it so that you can maybe even keep a mob stunned long enough that by the time it wants to cast that spell again, you can just stun it again. Okay, so now with all of that being said, here's one or two other little tips and tricks that have to do more with the wings themselves and things that might help you with some of the issues that each of the wings provide. The two core ones that I've found have been, if you're unlucky and you end up in the Soul Forge repeatedly and you end up with that stacking fire debuff, it can make it kind of difficult for you to check other corridors and things without fear of the stacking debuff killing you. So one of the fixes around that is if you can get one of the Ravenous Anima Cells, you can throw it at one of the stray fire elementals in there, as well as the Moss-worn Fire Callers or Flame Tenders, and they should drop for you a Flame-starved Cinder, which basically makes it so that you absorb all nearby heat, reducing fire damage taken by 65%, and this makes it much more convenient when making your way through those higher stacks of that debuff. In Mort Regar, a lot of the mobs drop a pool of, well, I don't know, let's just call it void poop. And this effectively just makes it difficult to stand in places and it will deal damage to you. If you throw a Ravenous Anima Cell at, well, quite a few mobs, most of the Shades, shadows, shamblers, spirits, and wraiths, they should drop a purifier, a purifier's flame, which makes it so that if you stand in it, it will effectively absorb it instead and heal you over time. Now, if you do find yourself in the unfortunate situation of being in Mort Regar and having to cross those bridges without, say, the ability to jump, or perhaps you are suffering from increased speed boost, which makes it very likely to accidentally clip and launch yourself into the abyss, as a Warlock, you do have a toolkit to get around this. Basically, just kind of creep your way along the chain as safely as you feel you can, and make sure that you're always in range of your personal Warlock teleporter. If for whatever reason you get launched off and you're falling and you don't want to lose all your Warlock stacks, then just click on your summoning circle and bamf yourself back up onto the bridge. If you feel a little bit nervous, you can always wait for the cooldown to reset before you continue to creep your way along. And once you've made it most of the way, you can just pretty much use your gateway to skip most of the rest of the chain anyways. The gateway also effectively makes it so that in any wing that has large corridors of traps, it can pretty much make it so you can skip just about all the traps. And I think that's more or less it. Now, of course, there are definitely tons and tons of anima powers that will differ depending on your runs that can increase your damage or your haste or your mastery or your defensive abilities. But these are kind of some of the more general core ones that I found are important, and that some of which are kind of a must-have to build up your ability to make your way through the highest levels of a Twisting Corridors. The general idea just being to balance your own survivability and your damage as much as possible, especially since rare and boss mobs in Twisting Corridors will get a stacking buff that increases their damage and their damage output the longer that they're alive. But hopefully this has been a helpful guide to all of you guys out there to help you do a solo run of the highest levels of Twisting Corridors. Hopefully we'll see a lot more Warlocks out there riding their corridor creepers out there in the maw. If you guys did find this helpful and informative, then please be sure to give the video a thumbs up and share it around to other Warlocks that may need a helping hand. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing. And if you have any more questions for me about things I may have missed, or other abilities or tweaks, or perhaps anima abilities that you're considering infusing, please let me know in the comment section below, and I'll try and get back to you guys about at least what my thoughts are on some of these abilities and some of the things that I might have missed in this video. That being said, if you want to continue to support me and see what else I'm up to, I do also have a Discord server that I've recently revamped and I'm trying to grow. So if you have ideas for other guides that you might want to see in the future, or again, any other questions, then please be sure to stop on by there. It's a community that's slowly growing, and I'm trying to make it something that is helpful and fun for people, and, you know, full of memes and all the rest. I also have a Twitch channel. If you want to see what this Warlock is like when he's out of his business suit and just wrecking things in other games, then please be sure to follow me on there. Currently, I'm trying to expand what I can do on the stream as far as tech goes, and its schedule. Right now, I'm scheduled to stream every Friday night at 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, and I'm trying to extend it to have a second day as well. So if you guys wouldn't mind heading over there and checking out some of the streams, that'd be greatly appreciated. Anyways, I've belabored this way too long. I hope you guys had a decent time watching this and it all made sense. If you guys have more questions, like I said, just let me know, and I will see all of you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.
Let it burn.
Yeah, now you're running into the issue I ran into. I had nowhere to put anything because somebody kept throwing shit at my station.